The Bulldogs. Let's get straight to the Canterbury Bulldogs as our second team. Coach Cameron Ciraldo, captain Stephen Crichton. 2024, they finished sixth, where they were the entertainers by the back end of the last year. Probably played the most entertaining brand of football in the comp. They just ended up gassed, I suppose, to an extent. Lost the qualifying final against Manly. In terms of player gains, and yes, I'll give you the honours of picking a 17 in a sec, Ollie. They've picked up Tom Amone from Leah Leopards, Marcelo Montoya from the Warriors, Anari Tuala from the Knights, and Satili Tupanua, probably the biggest signing of next year from the Chooks. They've lost Addo Carr, Harrison Edwards, Fasul Moali retired, Katoni Katonga's gone to Parramatta, Josiah Papali'i, he's gone to Parramatta as well. Chris Potato's gone back to Manly. Hayes Perham, the Broncos. I don't need to tell you everyone is going. They've lost Samrani, Skelton, and Tavatiano as well. Ollie, how does your 1 to 17 read if you want to have Craig? Oh, do you want me to mention the draw first or keep that for next?
Sure. I've gone, so out of all the signings that you just mentioned, I've only got one of them in the 17.
Yeah.
The rest of them, I think,
And does he make the starting team or is he a bench player?
A bench player for the one who I think is obviously going to make the 17. The rest, I think, will pop in and out throughout the year, but we'll sort of see. Connor Tracy at fullback. Wingers, I've got Wilson and Carraz. Centres, Sherry and Crichton. Harbs, Burton, and I've got Sexton at halfback, but I've got a note here to be replaced eventually by Oluwapu. I am tipping that to happen at some point during the year. King and Hughes are your props. Mahoney, obviously, at hooker. Kickout and Preston, second row. Curran starting at lock. Kurt Mann is your utility player off the bench. Satili Tupanua, the player who we were referring to, I have coming off the bench, at least at the start of the year. Jamin Salmon at 16 and at 17. I couldn't decide between three players. So I've got Haywood, Sutton, and Daniel Saluka Fafita there. I would more lean towards Haywood, but the only thing is there's not a prop on this bench. And that is a worrying sign about the Bulldogs. When we were talking off air, Barney, I think you sort of mentioned it earlier, where the Bulldogs' depth in their forward pack is a big worry. And I would more go towards Haywood in terms of who actually deserves the spot, but then you're going to have a lock and two second rowers on the bench, and I think really
Curran did play plenty of time in the middle last year. So.
Yeah, he did. I just think
that's what
keeping not having a prop on the bench, I think is a bit of a worry. I think you need at least one forward prop coming on after about 20 minutes to give your big men a bit of relief. So that's why I've got a Sutton or Saluka Fafita there. I can't really choose between the three, though, realistically, but that is a bit of a concern. And I've got that here as a concern for the Bulldogs. Their lack of depth in the forwards. Their starting pack is solid, but other than that, it's a concern.
I pretty much was in agreement with you. I can see them, what you're saying about the prop, I can see that, despite our opinions, I can see them starting Curran at the bench and have him play in the middle and they start Kurt Mann or similar at lock. Better or worse, a man or the other small forward. Who was the other quick guy? Was it Bodie Haywood? There's another guy that had a bit of toe that was playing in the smaller back line.
Through the middle rower. And a bit of hooker. Yeah, Haywood was pretty quick off the mark there.
Anyway,
had some
Barn,
acceleration.
any thoughts on that before we get to the draw?
Yeah, I agree. It's a huge concern. They really would want another big body there on that bench. Tupanua might end up being pushed into the middle if they do have some issues around size. But
sorry to interrupt. I did actually consider putting him prop.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
They got away with it last year. Just through the speed of the ruck, they were able to turn some teams over that were much larger than them. And they did pretty much everything right last year. They defended a little bit differently than everybody else in the comp. They did miss a lot of tackles, but they sort of came up real quick with that umbrella style in the middle of the field. And whether that led to a few more breaks on the outside of the back rowers or not, they always had someone coming back across in cover. So the centres and the back rowers were folding across from the other side of the field, and they did it constantly, and they were fit enough to do it. And they seemed to able to shut teams down. While teams were able to make meters through the middle of the field, once it got down to sort of that pressure time of trying to put points on, they were able to effectively shut a lot of teams out with that style of defence. So it'd be interesting whether they sort of continue with that cover mindset defensively on the edges and how teams react to them in attack. But yeah, same with the movement of ball. A lot of times they were happy to shift early and get to the edges with kick outs and the centres and wingers out there, and the speed got them down the field. They can play off the back foot just with the size of Burton's kicking game.
I was about to say, there is, and I just back to your point, to I guess both your points. They tried for Fanua. They would have killed for Fanua Blake, I reckon.
Oh, absolutely.
They tried for Fanua Blake. They couldn't get Takiaho through medical a year ago. They know as well as we do what their concern is. Mm-hmm. But your point is, there were games at the back end of last year where they couldn't get out of their own way, and Burton would just boot 80 metres downfield, and they have a tremendous line speed and tremendous chase that could then pin. I think there was a game against Newcastle. It was either Newcastle or Manly or something like that, and it was like they were just getting slaughtered. Well,
that's what really killed them in the finals series too.
Yeah, but then Burton could boot 80 metres downfield, and they were sort of just holding in there. I think they won a couple just completely off the back foot, and which is fantastic. But ultimately, to win a comp, they need that middle. They need that middle.
And I think they're going to cop a lot more pressure, especially Burton is going to be a very targeted player this year. Not that the teams didn't try to rush him last year and put a lot of pressure on him, but I can see teams coming at him from different angles, like really trying to get the back rowers to angle in on him and put pressure on him to cut down his time, especially kicking wise, and how that translates with the other halves being able to take some pressure off the hooker and the halfback will be interesting.
And once you become the marked man, and once you're in that top 4, 5, 6, ask Nico how that turns out for you. You can get that 1 year, and then it's.
He probably doesn't.
He's a tough
seem
cookie.
As mentally fragile as Nico has at times,
but he's tough and he'll cop it. But it's just all of a sudden they know on the last they're going to be swarming Burton.
Yeah.
100%. So
yeah. The passing game, once it gets out to Burton, it's fine. But through that hooker into the halfback and the decisions that are going to be made there will be critical for them. They've got some depth in key positions, but their halves are a standout. There's not a lot of depth there, and obviously that front row rotation is going to be very interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if they do continue to. I think they've still got a spot in their 30. I dare say they'd still be chasing some size somewhere. Whether they can get it or not is different. Back row. Depth's okay, especially with Tupanua coming in there, but they got some fantastic speed out wide. Karaz has been a genius since he's come into the
every I guess mainstream team I see get named has Montoya in the wing, but I'm a rap for Blake Wilson. Surely,
100%.
He gets a start.
Yeah, you would think so. Maybe a couple of games in, but I'd be picking him in front of Montoya.
Me too.
Yep.
Yeah.
They've now become the hunted, so I think they probably did slightly overachieve last year. Just as you mentioned, just got away with a couple of games that they probably could have and should have got beaten in. I don't think they fall too far, but they're in and around the same position for mine. I've got them finishing 6th again.
I'm in agreement. Just in terms of their draw, they play the top 8 from last year 10 times, and obviously this doesn't always translate to anything on paper. They play the top 4 7 times, which isn't fantastic. They play the Broncos, Sharks, Titans, Panthers, Bunnies, Dragons, and Roosters all twice, and perhaps they're a victim of their own success in terms of that getting thrown into the prime time slots along the way.
The last 4 games are the top 4 from last year.
Yeah, I just looked at that. So they need to be. They're another one that's going to need to be.
They won't want to be fighting for 8th into the last 6 rounds of the comp.
They kick off with the Dragons, Titans, and Eels. They have a fantastic start. The Sharks are the top team they play in the first 3 months, essentially. And what do you draw? Analytics show up.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, the back end of their season is going to be very, very tough for the Dogs. They have one of the better draws up until that point. They play... where have I got the Dogs here? Sorry, wrong page. Yeah, you mentioned they've got 7 games against the top 4, which isn't great, but they do play the bottom 5 teams from last year 8 times, so they basically play most of them twice. And then from 12th down, they've got 14 games, so more than half of the year they're playing teams that were in the bottom 12 from last year. So
They would need to win 12 of them.
of the 14, yeah.
Yeah.
Quite.
Maybe 10. Well, you know what? Who knows? Because maybe the Roosters get flogged every
And
week.
they only play
So,
the bottom of the 3 teams in that bottom of the 8. They only play each of those once. So
couple of talking points I'll mention. What I do like about their team this year is Connor Tracy's starting at fullback. But it took the two things are it took them forever to get there. But Connor Tracy starting at 1. I think he had an injury at start last year. In fairness, starting at 1, and Toby Sexton starting at 7 is settled because we were screaming for both. Probably more Sexton, but we were just couldn't wait to get Hutchinson out of the side last year. Once he came in,
it was night and day.
he was
once
a
came in.
perfect foil. So I think that is a tick. And from that point of view, I think they are propelled enough that they're going to, with enough momentum, they'll be confident in their systems. That, as you said, the defensive structure, and coming in with a full year with their spine intact, is going to, as Barney shoves pork crackling in his face. Which number are you? 2 or 3? So I can meet you both. I think that's both positive. So I think that's a positive coming into this year. I have grave concerns about 1, their draw, and 2, any depth to their front row stocks, even though both King and old mate Sam Hughes are a very good first grade front rowers. I'm going to say, yeah, what you see is what you get. 6 to 8. At some point they'll put on a hot streak. At some point they'll beat 3 teams in 3 weeks by 40. But I think that draw catches up with them. Yeah, your flash in the pan teams are just, we see it all the time. Your Newcastles, the Cowboys finished higher than I thought last year, but those ones that always make that bolt out of nowhere, they tend to level out.
Yeah.
And as you say, they become the hunted.
But this has been a build for this Bulldogs team. They haven't just jumped out of nowhere.
Oh,
you
that's
could
true.
see exactly what the
That's
pieces
true.
have been put together and the way
And that's where I said
they've
that
gone
if
about
they
it,
had have got
so.
Fanua Blake, they would be ecstatic this year. And I'd probably be tipping them nearly top 4.
yeah,
Whatever that
100%.
means.
I think they're going to be relying a lot on the ball playing an attack of a kick out or Preston, because the Bulldogs' edges on both edges, they look really solid.
Oh, those two are
so
crucial.
I think in attack, the halves, and I personally don't think Toby Sexton's actually the strongest half. This is why I think Oluwapu eventually replaces him, and Matt Burton's not a game,
both running
controller by
halves.
any sense of the imagination. So I think both of those blokes are going to be relying heavily on Kikau and Preston to actually.
He did
they're
get a
gonna
lot
get them
better
early.
at it towards the back end.
Yeah.
I thought
last
Sexton
year.
was good last year. You're
He's
more
up and
exposed to
down.
him from years
Yeah,
gone by.
I think he's very up and down. He does have like really good games, but I think it usually more comes against lower table teams. But just in general, back to the second rows, I think they're going to try and get them early ball in plays and sort of put the earnest a bit more on a Preston or a kick out to actually make something happen out on the edges a fair bit during 2025. So I think a lot of their attacking play, you're not actually going to see the halves as directly involved as much as possibly the second rows, because I think that's going to be the play a lot of the time. Get the ball to either of them and see if they can make
they'd
something
be silly
happen.
not to.
Especially near the line. Like,
Especially with the size in the middle. You probably will see 1 or 2 darts straight through the middle on the back of quick play of the balls, but I dare say they'll be using Kikau and Preston as more like front rowers, running at centres and halves. And they're A-graders, those 2 blokes. And if they can keep them fit for the entire year, I'm pretty comfortable that they finish in the 8. But if you lose one or both of them, could be
I'd argue
panic
that
stations.
those second rows, they're the key for the Bulldogs next season.
Especially when you
they're
then link that with Sherry and Crichton.
Yeah.
Like they could almost spend the whole attacking phases outside
How
the cage.
good was Crichton?
Yeah.
last
Yeah,
year?
we
My
talked about, we
God.
mentioned Herbie, but if Crichton's not the best centre in the game, then again top 3, whatever.
100%.
But both of those attacking weapon, like those edges, I think they spend a lot of time just right outside the edges.
Yeah.
On the edges, I should say.
Tram lines. Yeah.
Anything else? Supercoach, I guess you quickly knocked
Yeah,
that
so
over.
Kiraz 1,723 points for the year, average of 71.8. It's going to cost you 703,000 to get him in your team. Burton 649, 1,458 points for the year at an average of 66. And Mahoney 563k, scored 1380, average of 57.5 for the season. Mentioned Kiraz and Burton, they were the highest averages for the Dogs. Preston was their 3rd highest average with an average of 62.2. He's priced at 610k to get you into that team. Preston obviously didn't play as many games last year, so there's a possibility he could even push into the high 60s, maybe low 70s, if he gets a good run at it this year. I would imagine King and Curran probably get slightly more time this year than what they did last year. So they're guys that I'm probably looking at into my side, but I think they've got a few more points in them than what they averaged last year. So
I just want to ask about Satilli, the big name signing of the year. We've just talked about how good their edges are. Do you think Preston can maybe go back to a lock role and Tupanil's played lock?
Yeah, 100%.
In the past too. One of those may end up in the starting in 13, and that gives Curran a chance to be the middle.
Probably hurts Preston Supercoach wise if he does go back to the 13 with more of a distribution role needed there, but wouldn't be a bad thing for the side.
Yeah, interesting.